This is probably going to be one of my shorter blurb episodes, as it's one of the many topics I've had squirreled in the back of my mind for ages that I've wanted to do a video about, but just couldn't find a substantial enough approach vector. But after loitering around the subject for months, and after more than a few failed attempts to integrate the topic into a more affluent script, I've decided to simply bite the bullet and do my best to make this stand out as its own independent item. So, as regular viewers can no doubt surmise, I am not now, nor have I ever been religious. And as anyone can just as easily deduce by searching the same in my back catalog, were I the supreme overlord of the universe, I would have it where everyone would readily adopt a secular philosophy instead, as I firmly believe that all of the 4 key functions religion serves can be covered just as well, if not quite so easily, by a sufficient application of reason and logic. For example, Zen Buddhism or Stoicism quite neatly address the human need for agency and control, while basic deductive logic in the scientific method grants us the ability to acquire any objective information we wish about ourselves or the universe, and a splash of creativity grants us the power to apply that knowledge in whatever way best suits our specific interests. And yes, I'm aware that the last point is more an intrinsic trait than a learned skill, but my point still stands. Anyway, all the above notwithstanding, whenever the subject of whether or not we need religion comes up, there are 2 or 3 inevitable responses that theists come to bat with. 1. We need religion for our morality. 2. We need religion because it gives us purpose. And 3. We need religion because it gives us meaning. Now, I've already addressed all of these in more artistic detail elsewhere, but the TLDR of all is, no, and no, we don't. Morality is just a term for the cooperative mechanism that makes cultures and societies work. It's the product of culture, not faith. Culture is the product of common values, which are the result of shared incentives and environmental pressures. Thus, going to church is like going to the gym, in that its main function is not the act of worship or fitness itself, but the spectacle, i.e., you're not actually there to exercise or pray. You could just as easily do both of those things at home. You're there mainly because you want to be seen to get fit or get in touch with God. Next, purpose and meaning are both products of your accomplishments. For most people, it's accomplished by breeding, though for some it takes the form of a career, a hobby, a passion project, a noble cause, or something else of that sort. The reason I make a distinction between the two is that the meaning we derive from purpose is synonymous with significance and is both a product and result of external validation. In essence, your sense of personal meaning is how much of a difference you believe your existence and actions have made. And here's where the controversy of this piece begins. In my own personal experience, the people who are the most invested in their religious identity are most typically those with the least to offer themselves or society apart from their religious affectations, i.e., their sense of meaning arises from their belief that I am a good person because I may insert religion, political party, social or cultural group name here, and their purpose is thus to spread the influence of their affiliated brand. In case it's not obvious, if it was possible to have less than none of something, that would be the amount of respect I have for these sorts of invalid sheeple. To me, there's nothing more pathetic than outsourcing your identity to a group or body that is fundamentally incapable of perceiving you as anything other than disposable chattel, if it even perceives you at all. Now, what does any of this have to do with souls? Well, the idea of a soul, as in the singular origin point of the self, is the one thing most secular philosophies tend to struggle with, not so much describing as effectively communicating, as it's extremely complex and nebulous without a solid metaphorical image, such as a flame or a spark or a tree or whatnot, to anchor it to. As well, in secular society and culture, it tends to be the most paradoxically overlooked and accentuated aspect, as it's simultaneously the most important and yet the most useless concept in all of metaphysics. And I say useless in the context of Seneca's observation that religion is regarded by the masses as true, by the wise as false, and by the rulers as useful. As far as anyone outside of you yourself is concerned, the composition of your interior being, your soul, is only of as much consequence as they can profit by its external manifestation. In other words, nobody but you cares who you are, only what you can do for them. The issue this presents for us in our modern day is that, in order for our Western values of individual sovereignty, liberty, virtue, and justice to hold any water whatsoever, we need to anchor them in some form of individual sanctity, i.e., in order to have a meaningful sense of personal worth extant the province of academic test scores or economic spreadsheets, one needs to first actually be a person, and in order to be a person, one needs to have a soul. But in order for that concept to be taken seriously in a world of science and reason, it needs to be objectively quantifiable. A province which, at least as far as the Western canon is concerned, hasn't been under religious jurisdiction since the height of the Renaissance. The problem here is that, at least in the Christian worldview, the notion of the soul, and by extension the individual's sole sovereign right to themselves and anything that is the product thereof, is inextricably bound to the existence of an omnipotent, omniscient, infallible creator, which is the actual reason why secularization is terminal for any formerly Christian society, as the predicate for individualism dies along with the notion of the almighty Sky Father who granted them their original spirit in the first place. This, it is supposed by the religiously minded, is done at the moment of conception, hence their fanatical defense of the unborn. However, in the secular view, a soul is not something anyone could ever be born with, as it's predicated on a lifetime's worth of studious self-development, as it is the sum total of individual experiences and actions that make an individual unique. And I argue further that this is the default human view of the situation, as even the staunchest pro-lifers can't and don't tend to feel any intuitive reprehension towards referring to a baby of indeterminate sex by object pronouns. Think about it. At what age does it start to feel more appropriate to refer to a child whose sex is unknown as they rather than it? If you're anything like me, it'll probably be between the age of 7 and 10. It's no coincidence that this age range has been commonly referred to by both secular and religious sources throughout history as some variation on the age of reason or the age of accountability, meaning the age beyond which a person can be held personally responsible for their own actions as opposed to their poor behavior being dumped solely at the feet of their parents. But all topical controversies aside, the main point that I'm angling toward is, since nobody other than the individual profits from the development of such arcane physiognomy, and very few people will voluntarily expose themselves to the wealth of hardships necessary to forge their personal vessel, a secular soul would be the prize of only a select few elite loners. And I mean elite in the truest sense of the word, not in the postmodern sense of just denoting those with the most economic, social, and/or political advantage. Now, this all will be used by the religiously affluent to argue that secularity is innately evil since it devalues the individual, reducing them and everything that makes them themselves down to its constituent atoms and profit margins, and anything that can't be done to bring the former more in line with the latter is subsequently discarded as another outmoded or superstitious bug in an otherwise perfectly efficient system of capital production, allocation, and management. But I'm going to make a counterintuitive argument to the contrary, which on its face may sound like I'm trying to argue against practical reality with abstract principles, which I myself have called, in not so few words, an insubordinate fallacy of the highest order. However, I've also stated that, due to their irrevocably social nature, humans care infinitely more about rank and status than they do about real material advantage. It's why everyone wants to get a college degree, despite them becoming a more cumbersome liability year over year by any absolute metric. It's because the career fields which still hire predominantly based on academic gradients are still the most prestigious, if not the most economically profitable, again in terms of the actual net gain for the participants. Thus, in order to encourage the cultivation of sophisticated personalities, both by parents and institutions alike, the desired result must be reimagined as a source of status for both the recipient and the inculcator. But how do we do this? After all, did I not say several paragraphs ago that the reason our society creates blunted people is because it has no use for beings more complex than the average kitchenware? Yes, I did. But consider, status has always been associated with excess. The reason rich people buy old paintings or fancy clothes isn't because they really care about art or fashion, it's because they want to show off that they have the excess capital to piss away on a useless wall ornament or body cover. These things then, due to their excessively high price tags, become status tokens. But the issue with this is that, unlike a peacock's tail or a billionaire's yacht, you can't see someone else's internal identity, at least not at a glance. That's why economic productivity is and has always been the default metric of individual status, and thus of personal worth. It's readily visible as it produces measurable results. Therefore, if we want complex matrix forging to become the new art du jour, we have to make the results readily visible from a great distance. And fortunately, there's an easy way to do exactly that. You see, to my mind, a personality qualifies as soul-like when its engrammatic matrix has reached a level of complexity that it no longer neatly fits into a pre-existing category, meaning a person can be said to have a soul when they've reached a level of internal complexity that they, as an individual, can no longer be easily defined by external influences or associations. So if your whole identity can't be neatly summed up by a single line like, I'm a Christian, I'm a Democrat, I'm a gamer, I'm a boxer, I'm a manager, I'm a wife and mother, etc., then, and only then, will I consider you to be a complete individual. Of course, I still understand why this will never come to be, as actual individuals are more difficult to manage, harder to manipulate and control, and overall are more trouble for the system than they're ultimately worth. So, the resultant practice of any system like this is always going to be a pretty facade, a shallow parade of people pretending to be all deep and sophisticated and complex, while actually remaining nothing more than what they've always been. A herd of simple, bleeding animals squabbling over dirt and braying for attention from a system that's wholly too preoccupied with its own self-service to ever even begin to contemplate noticing them. But as usual, this has all just been my unhinged take on the issue. Let me know yours down below. And while you're there, consider checking out my alternative channels on Rumble and Odyssey if you feel like giving Big Brother YouTube the finger. And also go check out my books on Amazon or join as a channel member if you've a coin to spare on my expense. And in any event, until next we meet, stay safe, stay sane, and always remember, despite what anyone says, you can never think too much. You can only think badly. Peace be upon you.